Welcome to SEL and EDU, the podcast where we explore how educators bring social emotional learning to life by sharing stories, strategies, and sparks of inspiration. I'm your host, Dr. Krista Lay, owner of Resonance Education. Thank you for joining us on this SEL journey.
I'm Chris Nesi, host of Behind the Mic, Voices of the EPN, a part of the Education Podcast Network. Just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Maureen Chapman and James Simons love school. They are the co-founders of Cor Creative Partners, Cor from the Latin word heart. Their new website can be found at corcreativepartners.com. As a co-founder, Maureen supports leadership development and student engagement through speaking, coaching, workshops, and PLCs. James works to spread his love through educator professional development with a focus on student engagement, as well as leadership development for adults and adolescents alike. They both contribute to the community of thought leaders by speaking at conferences across the country and writing for various outlets, including Solution Tree, Edutopia, and Inside Higher Ed. They are the co-authors of the Solution Tree book, Leaders of the Class, teaching motivation, perseverance, communication, and collaboration in the secondary classroom. You can connect with Maureen and James on LinkedIn and learn more about their work at www.corcreativepartners.com. Maureen and James, welcome back to SEL and EDU. I am so happy to have you back on again. You are some of my favorite people in education and in SEL.
Absolutely.
Right before I hit record, we were talking about how time has gone by so quickly, and we like to do check-ins with each other, like how's things going? What are some new things you've learned? Sharing some tips and tricks with each other. Because of it being summer and us all having families, and we've just been chilling the last couple months. But then all of a sudden, I knew you were working on a book. It's out. Please come back on and tell us all about this. So I want to start off just jumping right into a book that you've written, because being all secondary people, I feel like SEL is forgotten about for the older students because they should know this by now. Your book addresses how to support some of these really foundational SEL skills with our older students. What were you seeing that motivated you to put this into a book for people?
We started this consultancy after seeing how much suffering there was in the pandemic, seeing just the intensity of the need. When we asked ourselves, how can we uniquely contribute in service of this field that's struggling, we had a lot of experience with integrating holistic child development into academics and in the secondary setting. It is developmentally different for students in elementary school. It is really appropriate to have that morning circle, to have that extra time with a lesson on friendship. In the secondary setting, a lot of people have rushed to adopt an SEL curriculum off the shelf and find somewhere maybe we can find 30 minutes once a week, if we're lucky, to have a little lesson. Inevitably, that isn't really enough. Teachers haven't written those lessons. It's not graded. It's not in context of the actual work. So we really wanted to provide a way for teachers to collaborate with our book, almost co-construct with our book. How can I sequentially and manageably teach all the skills of what someone would access in a leadership development program in my class where I have the relationships where the hard work is happening?
We see need that is so great. We see student potential that is so great. And then we also see our responsibilities, our to-do list, which is so great. We ask, how can we meet these needs, support students to move toward their tremendous potential, and also do it in a way that is manageable? We present a sequence of 5 units to help students build their skills to motivate, to persevere, move toward the goals that they're motivated to set, even when things get hard, to communicate authentically and adaptively with each other, and then lastly, to collaborate so as to not only achieve individual goals, but to also achieve collective goals. So hope is that teachers will take this framework and pair it with their pre-existing academic curriculum and just ask themselves where and when and how to incorporate this framework. For some teachers, it might be, okay, the first unit is motivate, and my kids are not motivated. So early in the year, build in some opportunities to reflect on why we are doing this work, why this work matters to me, to you, to us, to this world. And then I'm going to build in a regular routine of goal setting, not just for the year or for the course, but for every academic experience. And for one student, it might be, I want to make sure my voice is heard. And for another student, it might be, I want to make sure I hear my partner's voice. And so continually going big picture, this is what we want to achieve, what we believe we can achieve, and then zooming in to the small frame to say, this is what I'm ready to try and thus to achieve.
This is one of the reasons why I love hearing what you're both doing so much, is because we have the same philosophy around it's not one more thing, it's how it's integrated into what we're already doing. And so for us, we call it the instructional practices in the curriculum. And it's not a forced fit, it's where do you see these opportunities? There's several things that you mentioned that I want to come back to. Maureen, you said earlier about how you can take what could traditionally be for a leadership class. I helped create a leadership class at the school I was at, and we specifically were looking for students who had all types of leadership potential, even the kids who were, we've made this accessible for everybody because these are skills for all students and for all of us in particular. And so I'm curious what you've seen traditionally around who is considered a leader.
Yeah, secondary school is a time of identity development. It's our belief that if everyone could answer that question with, I'm many things, nobody is just one thing, but one of the things that I am is a leader. I have to believe that, and I have to make it true to work toward reaching my leadership potential, but also to be seen as a leader and to believe that my teacher thinks I'm a leader and believes in me in that way as well. Belief in self and others is one of the 4 conditions that we have in place in the book for leadership development to grow. And so, yes, it's really important to us that it's not just the kid who raises their hand, who gets on the stage, who's captain of this and president of that, who everybody says, oh, what a natural leader, but that we feel seen for who we are and for the way that we contribute as leaders. And James and I, in writing this book, did a ton of research in pedagogy and education, but also in the leadership world outside of education. And what are the lessons that we can transfer and distill for teachers, business or marketing or military, and how they see leaders and provide opportunities for leadership development. One thing that we noticed again and again was attention to emotions. And foundationally, opportunity to surface emotions and understand what they were telling us. We start with this book in terms of sequencing and not just diving in off the deep end and saying, and now do everything. Let's really give space and time for students to surface how they're feeling in your class. How do they feel in math class? How do they feel as a scientist? How do they feel in a school setting at all? How can they unpack what that means about what's important to them? Because emotions aren't always pleasant. It's not always a sunny day. If we can expect that we have a range of emotions, how can we provide direct instruction, maybe a mood meter or another literacy tool for students to be able to share what those are and know that you actually do care to hear it and that you will respond without just shutting down that any negative emotion is disrespectful or et cetera, but just to help kids process their emotions and how they see themselves in your classroom. So that's a really good starting point for any leadership program, to be able to really just honor that portion of building self-awareness. How are we feeling? And sharing about that first, really just with the student and the teacher, and build up that ability to feel safe there before later in the sequence, maybe asking students if they're comfortable sharing those in communication with each other.
That allows for a great baseline data for being able to set goals around content and academics, but also around social emotional learning. James, one of the pieces you had put in earlier was students thinking about what their specific goals were in, let's say, for example, a collaborative setting. I want to be able to speak up more. I want to be a better listener. When we're doing this, we're also allowing for purposeful grouping based on not just the content, but on SEL skills. For instance, who has a goal around wanting to be a better listener and who has a goal around wanting to be able to speak up. And so teachers can then partner up students and allow them to work on those skills based on the goals that they had created. Does that resonate with you? I'd love to hear how you interpret that, because it's so important, I think, for us as adults and for our students.
Yes. So thank you. What I'm hearing there is a question about the impact of individual goal setting, and then also a question about what it means to teach communication that is authentic, that is true to yourself, but that is also adaptive, that is responsive to those around you. In terms of the first, as educators, we talk and think a lot about differentiation. Often with that conversation and those thoughts comes a lot of overwhelm. Like, how could I possibly do that? I got 20 kids in this class, so I need to teach 20 different courses. Goal setting is a good example of taking a stance that is inherently differentiated. So you don't need to plan 20 lessons. You plan one lesson that includes goal setting. And in doing so, the kids are doing the work of differentiating. This is what I am working on. And then you go, oh, thank you for that data. In our coaching, one of my mantras is, how can the students do more and you do less? And in doing so, your job is going to feel more manageable and you are going to be better at it. Ultimately, the goal is to empower students to be doing this critical thinking, this creative, collaborative work. Goal setting is a great example of how you can do less and still move towards your goals of differentiation. And then in terms of your question about communication, it's very challenging and very important to determine, how can I show up in a way that is authentic? How can I be myself, but know that we are multifaceted and our identities are fluid, and we need to a degree, code switch. And tomorrow, maybe I will be at the beach with my family and be wearing something that would be wildly inappropriate if I showed up to this conversation. In both moments, I'm being myself. I am just adapting according to the setting. And the thing is, kids are so good at this. No one is better at code switching than a child. You know, my kids come to me and they're all sweet and nice and they're cuddling with me. And then they go to their friends and they're using a different language and they are also expressing affection, but it may be in a different way. When I'm at home, I'm speaking Spanish. And when I'm in math class, I'm speaking English. And so this is one of the many superpowers that our kids are showing up with. We need to honor these skills, and we need to empower and instruct students to transfer those skills to the work that we're doing now. Let's communicate about communication. What does it look like in this setting? And how do you want to communicate authentically?
Yeah. And sometimes when kids are really perceiving an injustice, their injustice meter is so sensitive, as it should be. Maybe you choose not to be adaptive because you need to break something, or you're perceiving that you need to break something. And so if we're continually opening the lines of communication about students' emotions and where they're coming from and what to do with them, we're going to hear some of their feelings about what's not fair, what should be happening. Again, it just opens those lines of communication so a teacher and a student can have the conversation they need to have so that people can move through whatever that big feeling was. Because if there are really big feelings, learning is not happening. How can we help students have hard conversations and feel safe, especially knowing there is a power imbalance? We have formal power and positional power they don't have, and everybody knows it. So how can we make it safe to engage in those conversations with students and also be supportive for them to say, what does that mean for us in this class? Because I believe in you and believe in the work for you. So I'm going to stick with you through this, hold high standards for you behaviorally, academically, emotionally, et cetera.
Hearing you speak, Maureen, reminds me of the quote around being curious and not judgmental. And so student is perceiving an injustice and voices that. How can we regulate and maybe get to a point where we're leaning in and saying, tell me more about why you feel that way and how you're defining this as an injustice. And it might even be something that helps transform our way of thinking about something.
Every unit in the book ends with scaffold. So we present comedy to open, addressing this competency and how to help students engage in ongoing personal data collection and reflection, and then a quick performance task. But then we dive into common scenarios we've seen in our coaching. And in perseverance, really can't learn when we're angry, anxiety and boredom being the other two that are most harmful to learning. And then the most positive, which is more positive than any of those is negative, is curiosity. So how can we counter anger with curiosity, boredom with curiosity? And I think this stance of curiosity is the stance of a leader, helping students to do that. One of the core practices of leadership that we dig into is experimenting with strategies. Okay, let's mess up. Let's mess around. I'm noticing that I'm not getting my homework in. Maybe I could try this. Let's try that and see how it goes. I'm noticing that I'm talking too much or in conflict constantly. How can we notice that and just say, that's what's going on? What can I try? Because every emotion is valid, but not every behavior is. So how can we keep just holding ourselves accountable to trying different things till we can be acting in ways that align with our goals, that serve us in reaching our leadership potential and so on?
That reminds me very specifically of the scientific process. In science, what are all the variables and how do I adjust these variables? How do I adjust these emotions or try these different strategies to see how it impacts the outcome? And then based on that, what outcome do I want? But it does take that experimenting. I love that you use that word specifically within an SEL context with emotions. I hadn't thought of it that way before.
Yeah, you're right, Krista. That isn't a defect. That is a feature that is built in. We know that the scientific method is functioning properly when we are making many mistakes and learning from them. And when it comes to classrooms, we similarly think of some mistakes as features. I know that when I give you this math problem, 7 of the 10 kids here are going to make this mistake. And I know to anticipate it and to provide the following corrective instruction. With our social and emotional skills, the mistakes we make are also features, not bugs. We are in this safe space, messing up all over the place, so that later, when we leave this space, when the stakes are higher, when the safety is lower, we are going to be prepared. And so if a student makes a math mistake, we're not getting emotional about it. We're going, yep, all part of the plan. When a student is rude to another student, when a student is dysregulated and shuts down, when a student demonstrates any kind of social or emotional gap, we need to say, yes, this is part of the process. You are meant to make this mistake in the math problem. This is all part of the beautiful science experiment that is teaching and learning. So let's gather data from whatever explosion we just had in the lab, and let's talk about what are we going to try in our next experiment.
My SEL mentor, I learned a great deal from him about experiential learning, specifically in SEL. And there's a smoother entry point at elementary because people seem to have a little bit more time with their students, as opposed to half an hour to do this experiential activity with high school or middle school students and then figure out how does it relate to content. what worked, what didn't work, because sometimes as adults, we get to step out of times where we feel uncomfortable. Yet we want the students to have that experience with, yes, this was meant to happen. And so as facilitators, I know that sometimes we do that because we need those memories to remember what it felt like to be a little uncomfortable and to stretch. But there's a lot of times as adults, we can opt out of that experience that we still want our students to learn from.
There is a study that we like to cite in which people are given the choice to either sit with their thoughts for some period of time, not even like maybe 10 minutes, or to self-administer a shock to themselves to get out of it. And a lot of people choose to shock themselves rather than sit with their thoughts. So absolutely, we have to build our stamina, just like we teach students to build their stamina for sustained silent reading. We start with 1 minute, then 2 minutes, and 5 minutes. But we really believe through the book that if we can build our capacity to reflect and sit with the emotions and give tools to help people pick words. Kids only have a couple of words, but to build our skill and our stamina for some of this work, that it's really valuable. And we're in such a rush in school constantly. Teachers' time away from students is so precious and so rare. They just want to catch their breath, but they're running and running. Ask teachers to start to just think of some of their own thoughts about their own motivation or their own communication and feedback tendencies, et cetera, whatever the competency may be, to really be able to bring that into the talking points they'll use with students to launch. The teacher is in partnership with this book, co-constructing how it's delivered and really hopefully surfacing some things and sharing some things that maybe they think kids would know, but sometimes we make those assumptions and we don't take the time to share what we're really thinking about our own purpose. There was something in the David Yeager book, 10 to 25, about how even the best teachers often skip over sharing their big why. This just builds that in and gives that time to make that more visible to students before digging in.
I'm trying not to smile so much because one of the other favorite things about you both is that you bring up great research, and I'm such a research nerd. So it's things that you're like, oh yes, we put this into practice, but then already you've shared the Hattie research and 2 more books. It helps reach a group of teachers who need to know the research behind this. So what feels like it works and feels right gut-wise, emotionally, but then also brain-wise, what do we know is best practice?
You're right, Krista. Like, there is so much research about best practices. And when you look at other industries benefiting from collaborative advancements, and we need to do the same in education. But the good news is research best practices enable creativity and critical thinking and freedom for the adult, but also for the students. If we are all doing what is best, paradoxically, all of our classes will look different because each class will have different individuals in there who have different goals and different strengths and struggles and different relationships with each other. What do we know is effective that we can scale across classrooms, across schools, across districts? And then within that, where is the opportunity for me to be me and for you to be you and for us to be us? Because there is no other classroom in the world like this one.
We have that same philosophy that it can't be scripted. We have uniquenesses in who we are and the students, and it changes every hour to hour and a half. So in secondary, we need to adjust and be like, okay, we've got this new group of students who are individuals who are interacting with me. The whole dynamic looks different. What can I adjust because of my own expertise and a sense of agency as an adult to do what's best? And sometimes that piece is missing for secondary, that we trust that you have the professional expertise and you know your students, and you leverage that piece by saying, here are some foundational starting points and strategies. You can take these and adjust them to fit what you need in your context.
I don't know any educator who would say they don't know their students and they don't love their students. So leaning into those relationships as a starting point, and then where people get sometimes a worry that can get in the way of the work is, if I ask a question and I don't know what the answer is going to be, I don't know what kids will say if I say, how did you feel motivated today? And what they say If they didn't feel motivated, it might hurt my feelings. Maybe I don't want to hear that. So giving some key responses and some opportunity for teachers to explore that for themselves too, often is a great entry point. We can just get curious in response. We can have conversations. We can grow closer in our relationships through the conversation about the response. So that is one of the other conditions for leadership is opportunities to lead. So we have to keep providing chances for students to do it. If you taught secondary school, you can't tell a kid what to think. They have to discover it for themselves, and we can create the space in which they do that. That's messier, it's maybe more dynamic, but it's really rich and rewarding. Growth chances for kids to feel more like leaders means, again, there's that experimentation vibe in the room, but it's also very productive learning. It is the work that we all went through as we became professionals.
Yeah, and it's really important to see that just as we are encouraging students to have the courage to experiment, knowing that the path to success is laid with a series of mistakes, educators also operate often from a place of fear. What if I ask if kids like this lesson and they say no? What if I try a new lesson and it's not going great and the principal walks in? We are scientists. It is our job to experiment. And as we experiment, it is our job to gather data, and feedback from others is important data. I remember in my first year of teaching 8th grade, at the end of the year, I gave them a survey because a colleague told me student voice is important. So how was this year? And they filled it out, and I collected them all, and I put them in my bag, and I couldn't look at them. I was terrified because the stakes were so high. That survey was telling me, was my first year as a teacher a success or a failure? And we know that we need feedback that is more frequent, communication. So you and your spouse should once a decade ask how each other is doing. No, you need to constantly be asking and learning and growing together through that process. And so similarly, my colleague was right to say, hear from kids, but that survey should have been going out in the first class and the second class and the third class. That survey in different forms should be happening at the start of class and the middle of class and the end of class. And if we're constantly gathering that data and adjusting our practice, it's far less threatening because not as much is at stake. And that feedback is going to be increasingly positive.
I used to do feedback surveys after every unit. What resonated with you? What did you enjoy? What was difficult? What recommendations do you have? And I remember there were times when I didn't feel it went well. And so I didn't give the survey because I had this fear that what they were going to say reinforced what I already thought. But that was the time when I needed it the most so that I knew what to fix and I could do it with them. I always give a feedback survey after professional learning. I can't look at it for a couple of days because I've invested so much time leading up to there and my emotional energy in my heart that I have to give it a couple days space so I can look at it with clarity and without fear and receive it critically. And so I know this about myself that I'll look back a couple days later.
We have hearts and we do have a wave of emotions that like you need to get through before receiving feedback. Just the process of what did they say? What did I hear? What did they actually, just going through those logical steps gives you enough time to actually then process something instead of just being in the heightened emotion and shutting down and never seeing it at all. But when we're asking students to learn how to give and receive feedback in the Communicate chapter, we use a really simple template. What are your observations, celebrations, and questions? Nowhere in there is criticisms. Nowhere in there is what could someone have done better. People don't need to hear that, first of all. We are hard on ourselves. And the second someone comes in and tells us what we should have done differently, and they didn't even ask us what we thought, we're shutting down. So how do we help students know that we're not expecting them to make people feel bad? When I had senior interns giving presentations, the only prompt was, what was your favorite part? And students were like thrown. What am I supposed to tell them We just need to be inspired and replicate what's working well. And that is some of the best feedback, but training students who are so accustomed to how do I tear this down to instead be in the celebration zone of what was great. Why not just be in that zone? Because we're going to be so much more inspired to do great things when we're feeling that safety and that excitement.
And as we build that safety, it becomes a lot easier to also sometimes give critical feedback. Maureen's point is very valid. We shouldn't be leading with critical feedback. It shouldn't be the predominant type of feedback that is coming out. There's a survey from the Harvard Business Review that I think there should be a ratio of 6-1 in terms of affirming feedback versus constructive feedback. So there is a place for it. But before you have someone walk along the tightrope of receiving constructive feedback, you need to put the safety net below through specific, authentic, affirming feedback. Once you've created that safety, the need for that critical feedback is much less, because within a safe space, when you take an inquiry stance, the receiver of the feedback is going to say the thing you wanted to say before you even get a chance. I remember when I became a principal and I first had to meet with teachers, and I thought, oh gosh, I observed your class and you're talking too much. The kids can't get a word in, and I'm worried that if I tell them this, they're going to think that I don't think they're a good teacher and they're going to shut down. I remember feeling nervous about delivering this feedback, and instead just starting with some celebrations, focusing on building some safety, and then saying, what did you think? Once that safety was developed, the person would go, I feel really good about this. That went pretty well. And it was such a relief to realize that it's not me against them. It is the two of us working together. And once we establish that we're on the same team and we are safe, we are going to end up seeing the same things and working towards the same goal from whatever shared perspective.
My own personal learning, when I look at the transcripts of the podcasts, and I realize how many times I start a sentence with "and," which I just did, and I start a sentence with "I think." I love that inquiry approach, because people will figure it out when they're ready to receive that piece. And you're hoping they have that self-awareness that the goal is, the heart is there, the desire is there, and that they're going to unpack that and keep moving forward.
That's exactly it, Christy. You have the practice of reflecting on what happened and making an observation. That's the first step of feedback. I am observing that. I am starting my sentences with, and I think, what does that mean? What do I wonder? And for students to be capturing these little data, was I motivated today? What emotions did I feel today? And you can say, what do you notice about your emotions over time? Do you notice that you tend to, whatever, like to not have your homework? You notice that you tended to get bored. What do you think that means? What do you think we can do? So it's this starting point from a student's self-report and their observations and the practice of looking back at it. This is me over time. This is what's going on. And that's building that self-awareness. Or if what a student's reporting is like way off of what you're seeing, there's a great conversation there too.
As teachers, we are inevitably going to have missteps and make mistakes, whether it's in content or SEL. If we have that positive cushion, students can be more forgiving for that misstep. That is the foundational piece too for restorative practices, that 80% of it is proactive, building community so that when there is harm caused, it's easier to repair because there's an assumption of good intent and there's a process to be able to repair that. That 6-1 is really sticking with me. I'm pretty sure too that you need 6 positive thoughts to counteract a negative thought.
Yeah, common language is so important. And how do we define leadership? If we define leadership as making mistakes and experimenting and growing, now we can be more compassionate toward ourselves. We were supposed to mess up. If we weren't messing up in an interaction ever or in our thoughts ever, we probably aren't in challenging enough situations. And so we're not stepping into the arena, as Brene Brown would say, like, how do we get ourselves in the place where we're failing enough to learn the right lessons. We're supposed to be messing up. That's that growth and that stretch.
And I really appreciate, Krista, what you said about positive thoughts. Each of us has written and rewritten over our lives about ourselves, about others, what we are capable of and incapable of, about what our intentions were and the effects were. And we need to continually challenge the unproductive stories. You can't just write something once in pencil and go, there you go, a new narrative, because that story is in ink and it is in big, bold letters. And so you need to keep writing a new truth over and over. And by extension, support us to engage in the external practices that impact how we are behaving to ensure that the classroom space is as productive and as positive as it can be for every single individual in it.
And that piece of feedback where we're looking at how are we impacting or creating an experience for everybody also comes back to an accountability piece. And that as an educator or as a student, calling out injustices, because the fact that you're willing to engage in that vulnerability of calling something out now, maybe the way that students do it or the way that we as adults do it isn't always the best way. But the fact that we're invested in addressing something and trying to write it takes a lot of energy and courage to put that out there. So here is some critical feedback that we're working on together. And it's hard, but I'm doing it because I care about you and your growth and I see your potential. And I want to support you to be the best version of yourself. So what does this look like for adults and for students? It's engaging in those hard conversations and knowing that it's coming from a sense of support and love and hope because we care and not because we're trying to discipline.
Punishment is just something that doesn't solve the problem and damages relationships. Leaders own their mistakes. Leaders understand where they're coming from. They know they have bias. They've been raised in a certain way. They've lived through a certain set of experiences. They're calling out an injustice and you've been part of what they're perceiving as the problem. Naming that, just owning whatever it is that you've done and modeling that builds trust and it helps students to see like we all come from somewhere and we're listening to each other. And we might make mistakes or we might need to perceive things differently, but it's safe to have the feelings ultimately to be believing in the work and the power of the work to help us achieve the things that are important to us and have the life that we want to have and whatever version that is, which should be different for every person.
And as I'm looking at the title of your book, we've talked about the motivation, the communication, the collaboration, and that brings us to the perseverance piece. And we've mentioned it in the past, but this idea that you have a goal, you have a motivation, you're working with other people, we've made mistakes, we're getting the feedback, we have belief in each other's growth, and we're going to persevere and continue to keep working towards the best version of ourselves. The book that you've written provides a framework with strategies and really thoughtful practices backed by the research to guide educators.
Yeah, we've been so fortunate to be partnering with teachers through really hundreds of workshops as we've been writing. There was a math teacher who was using the strategy bank from Persevere, and she wasn't using it with everyone, but she was like, I got this group of boys and they won't do their homework. And so she was like, sure, I'll try it. She had them write, what are the things getting in the way? What's going on? What do they think they could try? And she was like, honest. I didn't think they would, but it's, you invite them to share, like you actually want to listen and they're honest. And that's a really important starting point. And surely enough, they could turn around. So I think this book is designed to be adaptable to your own situation. Maybe you want to try every unit and that's the gold standard, but maybe you're going to try one unit or maybe you're going to try it with some kids where something's coming up and it seems really important. We have been so grateful for all the partners who shared how it's been going so we could see what is a really simple, usable, versatile way that all these things could happen so that the teachers who are trying to do this, and they are out there in droves, have some things they can pull on without getting overwhelmed.
Just to echo what Maureen's saying, we did spend some time staring at a screen, sometimes feeling inspired, sometimes feeling tired, sometimes feeling fill in the blanks, every box in the mood meter. But we really believe this book was written in the classroom, and it was written in collaboration with many skilled, committed educators. This book is a love letter to those educators and to the students they're supporting and to the work that they are doing. We learn so much from every educator with whom we work. And then we're so privileged to then take that learning and bring it to someone else who is in their own silo, juggling their own array of household objects while riding on a unicycle. It's such a privilege to be able to be in the classroom learning, and then every now and then step out of the madness and sit in a room and stare at a screen and try to organize everything we've learned. We feel very grateful and very proud, and we're excited for people to be holding it and to be giving us feedback, going back to the idea that this is all just a big science experiment. We can't wait to from people who are trying things out with our book, and we're so grateful.
One last question. We've got a musical theme going through this year because music opens up the world. I'm curious for you right now, who or what songs are on repeat on your playlist at the moment?
That's our kind of question. We love music. We spend a lot of time thinking and talking about music, and every now and then listening to it as well. The past couple weeks I've been listening to the album Bloodless by the singer-songwriter Samia, who's a young songwriter. It's really stripped down and heartfelt and really good songwriting. So I've been enjoying that record a lot.
I was just in Denver and went out to a show at Red Rocks, which is this beautiful amphitheater, and saw the Marias. I'm generally loving any sad female vocal. So yeah, the Marias is what I've been listening to, just getting into and experiencing the joy in that show and coming off of it.
Thank you both so much for your time. I always enjoy talking with you. I'm excited to read your book when it comes out because people are looking for what are some ways that I can make this part of what I do routinely. We just want the work out there, educators to feel good about what they're doing and how they're supporting students. And we want to see students feeling confident in who they are and how they're showing up as the best version of themselves. So thank you. I look forward to having you on again next year. Can you be regulars?
Yes.
We're so grateful to you, Krista. It is always really energizing just to spend time with you. We're really inspired by the energy and the ideas that you bring to this work. And it's just nice to recognize a counterpart in this important work. So thank you very much for this opportunity to share about this work that we've been doing that we feel so invested in. So we're incredibly grateful and have really enjoyed this time together.
Thank you again for tuning in to this episode of SEL in EDU. At Residence Education, we equip educators with knowledge, skills, and resources to design learning experiences that foster students' academic, social, and emotional growth. We believe that every small action to foster connections and growth creates ripples shaping the future.